A covalent bond is a chemical bond that involves the sharing of electron pairs between atoms. These electron pairs are known as shared pairs or bonding pairs, and the stable balance of attractive and repulsive forces between atoms when they share electrons is known as covalent bonding. Hi, I'm Thomas Jackson, the founder of Covalent. We believe that the sharing of our ideas are like the sharing of electrons, that it's important to have attractive and repulsive forces, and that we showcase both. That it's through transparent discussion that the best ideas will win. With this series, we would like to inform about the technologies and designs surrounding our space, VR, AR, and XR, while being entertaining and showing the connections between the people working in the space. I recently sat down with Ryan Kopinsky to talk a little bit about his field, augmented reality. All right, so here with Mr. Ryan Kopinsky today, longtime friend, and so excited to have him on the podcast. We're gonna start, we're gonna call this thing the Covalent Bonding Podcast, I believe. I think that's the best name for it. We've been looking for a name, and me and Ryan have been a longtime friend, so I think it's a great way to kick this thing off as with an old time good buddy, but with a pretty serious subject. Augmented reality is ever pressing, in our face every day. And I'm so excited to have our first guest be on such a topic that's gonna, be so much of a pressing thing over the next, decade or so. I'm so excited about that. So before we get started though, let's do a quick introduction on you and talk a little bit about you. Well, where to start? First, PhD, robotics from Florida State. Originally from Suriname, South America, moved to Tallahassee, Florida here, take on his degree, and that was in 2008.
Yeah, 2008.
And then has been in the AR, augmented reality space now for almost 6 years. So let's kick it off. Let's do let's take it all the way back, honestly. We want to talk all the way back about your love about robotics, but
Sure.
if we need to even go back all the way about just how your love for technology started and where that, first developed and where that began.
The first time I remember being really engaged into tech, I think I was 4 years old, and I was playing on my dad's laptop with AutoCAD. And his laptop, I remember being like this thick. It was like a $6,000 laptop. It was just a ginormous piece of equipment. And I was just drawing squares. And I was really fascinated that I could create something, like make something digital. And I always wanted to kind of bring that into reality. Like, how can you design something and then put it into reality? And so fast forward, I did my undergrad at FAMU in electrical engineering. Didn't really like that as much, and so I said, you know what, I should switch to something a bit more hands-on. And mechanical engineering was kind of like the obvious choice. And I was accepted at Florida State, had a fellowship for 5 years doing my PhD, and I started working on really cool robots for the military, and that was like where I started to sense, hey, this is what I wanted to do for, since I was a kid, was to really, design something in like a digital space, computer,
Right.
and then see it come to life, in the physical world. That was just so fascinating to me.
Right. One thing I've noticed, especially about people who I feel like in our space a lot, have that moment when they're early on, when they're a kid, where something happens that
Sure.
kind of struck them. I definitely remember those moments with me that my mom, I never forget, giving me a computer that was way too expensive to play around with. Like, hey, you can just play around with this. And she kind of knew I would be looking at this thing. It's like it's this treasure thing, but she
Yeah.
also knew it was like maybe he'll break it, maybe he doesn't. But then for us, it's this huge opportunity to go dive into this world that ends up sparking, the imagination. So that's really cool.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. I think the previous generation of my dad, and my grandpa and my mom and stuff, they were kind of trained to not break things,
Mhm.
right? They didn't really believe in the trial and error. And the way we were raised, with computers at least, was to, just see what happens. And I think, even with, Gen Z now, is they are not afraid to fail. And so I think that's, in robotics and also in augmented reality, having like that, not having the fear of failure, you can really create some awesome things. So I really see it in you and in myself, that we're not afraid to break things. And it's important.
That's a really awesome point, that some of these technologies open up and give, some of the youth now some of the ability to experiment, as we luckily got the opportunity to when we were younger, but they may have the opportunity to, like you said, experiment with that virtual lab toolkit. So that's really exciting. We'll hopefully get into that a little more. All right, so how does your background in robotics, you think, kind of come along and help you understand some of the problems that you're going to face in the augmented reality world?
Sure. So I think like the simplest thing I can explain robotics as is something that senses the environment and then acts on it. And so if you have like a robot that, in San Francisco right now and in many other places, they have these robots that drive on the streets to bring you food. And what it has to do is it has to sense its environment to be able to navigate it. And then somehow interact with that by driving, crossing the street and all that stuff. When you think of augmented reality, the same thing really happens. It has to sense the environment, it has to build a map of your surrounding environment, and then allows you to kind of act on it by putting in content or engaging with content. And so those two parallels are very similar. Obviously, robotics, is a different field, and augmented reality is too. But it really brings it down to sense your surroundings and then be able to interact with them. And they both have that in common.
Yeah, it almost seems like your understanding of the physical world that you developed from the robotics side could be a huge application in your understanding coming into how do you manipulate in software and overlay that world, the information that you would want if you were standing right there as a physical worker, and so that's pretty interesting. I've never, made that
and
connection, but
they actually use some of the same technology. So in robots, navigation is a really big thing in robotics, right? Because you want it to be safe. And what they use is called a concept called SLAM, simultaneous localization and mapping.
Right.
So it maps the environment and then figures out where is it in relation to that environment. And AR uses the exact same process to map your phone in the space that it is in.
Right.
And so some of the technologies are actually one-to-one mapped between robotics and AR.
What do you think some of the most pressing issues facing the augmented reality space over the coming decade are going to be? The ones you're excited about working on, the ones you think AR is the most useful for in the coming years. And then I don't think a lot of people think about the downsides of the way some of these technologies, or they don't think we think enough about it, the people who are creators in the space. But about doing this podcast, I wanted to show them that we were very much thinking about it. So what are some of the ways you think it could be used for quote unquote evil in the coming years?
Sure. So I actually don't think that people don't think of the evil. I think they think of the dystopian genres of movies or whatever. So Hollywood loves to film everything either utopian, like extremely utopian, or extremely dystopian. Never just a balanced reality like we actually live in. And so I'll start with the things that can go wrong. We've never had a technology that is so close in our personal space and that sees everything that we see. Otherwise it won't work. AR needs to be around us. And so when the digital world merges with our physical, it becomes very personal. And so privacy becomes paramount. I was a big proponent of social networks, right? When Facebook first came out, I don't know, 10 something years ago, it was an amazing technology. And we've seen it being weaponized in elections, in spreading misinformation. And they're completely incompetent in guarding that, in making sure that doesn't happen, or they're complacent, at worse. And so we have to be very intentional when we design, augmented reality and virtual reality experiences, thinking about, okay, what are the things that can go wrong? How can these be weaponized? And how can we build in safeguards to prevent bad actors from acting on it? And one platform that really does it well, in my opinion at least, I'm not too active on it, but Reddit. If you do something crappy on Reddit, you will get downvoted and banned. Twitter is starting to do that better now with harassment, but I think the tech world has to come to its senses and say, hey, we cannot let bad things happen, and turn our eyes away because we just want to make money. And so I think the dystopian future that we can see for AR is that it starts to display information that is private. So for example, if someone points at your face, it can see that you recently had the flu, or worse, the coronavirus.
Right.
Or show things that you don't want the public to just readily see. On the flip side, I think we've never had a computing platform that is so personal and so in our space that it could truly, change the way we work. So everything that we do right now with the internet or really technology as a general thing is always through a window. Whether you have a 5-inch window or in this case a very large 34-inch window, it is very constraining. We're using a 2D medium to interact with a 3D or even 4D space. And so when you get AR to be ubiquitous and to be, really in any device that you have, you can start to manipulate the digital world just the same way you would do the physical world, and that's very powerful. And so as designers of this new medium, I think we have to be good stewards of it. We have to make sure that we build in safe mechanisms where people don't get harassed, where, if misinformation is being spread or if people's privacy is being violated, that you have safeguards against that. But it's also a very exciting time because we've never ever had a technology where you have to completely rethink the way you design stuff. 2D is not going to work, right? You cannot just put a virtual screen in AR and call it innovative. That's called 2D thinking. And so making the shift, UX, UI to 3D is going to be super fascinating to see.
No, you bring up some amazing points there, and just one that comes to mind is, are we supposed to be the stewards of, the people that are supposed to create the dialogue or open up the dialogue between the creators, the algorithm creators, if you will, and the public, and saying, hey, the public needs to ask, we need to demand, what do we want those algorithms to be like? And we as the stewards, potentially the people in our industry willing enough to be public and do podcasts and put our name out there and talk, can we be the intermediary that asks, hey, here's what the public is demanding of these algorithms, here's how we need to shape them? Because like I said, I think what's missing or feels like it's missing is this dialogue between the people who are creating the algorithms and what we want, and so that we don't get that dystopian future, right, that you were kind of alluding to. So hopefully, like I said, this could be the beginning of that dialogue and starting that idea. All right, so we talked a little bit about the potential future and things to come. Let's talk about something that's ever pressing right now, the present. We just got back from an incredible event in Boston where to take everyone back, or actually you told me back in December of this event MIT was going to be having called Reality Hack. I didn't know anything about it. You just sent me a link to a website and we started looking into it. Turns out this is an amazing, hackathon that MIT's been putting on for 5-6 years now, I think. Yeah. And I think honestly could quite be the kind of coup de grace, if you will, the pinnacle of hackathons when it comes to kind of our space, the VR and AR space. And so exciting to share that moment and that whole experience with you, and knowing you for as long as we've known each other, and to see this space come along as fast as it's come, and then to get to go to MIT for the first time. I was at a point kind of in my life where I was like, I wouldn't go to any other hackathon, but if MIT, is having one, and I knew, if you were going, it was like, well, this is a no-brainer kind of thing. Let's give it a shot. I'll never forget ever. So I'd love for you to just take us back there, tell us kind of your journey. I think me and you could honestly spend hours just telling our different sections of what we saw there. Sure. But I'd love to see, what was your journey? What was your, how did it, through your lens? Sure.
So MIT Reality Hack is kind of like a 5-day event, also known as a hackathon. So for people that don't know what a hackathon is, it's essentially non-stop coding, right? So you form a team of people. There's a bunch of developers, designers, people in business, and they all come in the same space and they work on an idea. And so that's what we did for 5 days at MIT Reality Hack. And it was quite the experience. So we're from Florida, so it's a bit warmer here, and so we go to Boston, and we get there, it starts snowing, and so it's really cold. I had 5 layers, and it was still cold.
It was insane.
Yeah, it was good though. And so yeah, the event itself was amazing. It was held at the MIT Media Lab, which is known for its research in AR and VR. And we get there, the first day is really just doing workshops. and really getting an intro into the tools you really need to build AR and VR for
Right.
those that haven't used them before. And then that same night, on the first day of events, we had like team pairing. And so it was literally 400 people under the MIT Dome yelling and pitching ideas and trying to find designers and try to find developers. And I made a good friend, Yogi, who works at BTC earlier that day. And so we're like, we should link up, we should just be a team. And then he had a friend, Alex, which works for IBM, that also joined us. And so we had 3 people. And so we were looking for a designer because Alex is a developer, I am a developer, and Yogi's really a market, a research strategy type of person. And so we were looking for a designer, like an artist. We couldn't find it. So I go through all those people, walking, looking for people, and when I come back, they found another teammate, Emily. She wasn't a designer, but she was kind of like a generalist, mostly focused on marketing things.
Right.
And when I started talking to them, I was like, okay, I don't think we need a designer because Emily was like pretty solid in most things that we still needed.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, let's form a team. Let's not worry too much about, talking to everyone in this space. Let's just form a strong team and start working on the idea. And so that was like late at night. It was like 1 a.m. already.
Right.
We go home to the hotel where everyone goes home. Next day, we start working, hashing out the idea. We had a very strict deadline.
Mhm.
And so everything was really on a tight schedule. And so we were running behind. And so we cut out every like nice to have feature. We just wanted to focus on the core. And the core was we wanted to make it easy to attach content to people. Because what tends to happen with AR is you attach content to spaces,
Mhm.
a monument or a art piece in a museum. It's usually a static piece. And so it's a lot harder to attach it to moving pieces like a human. And so we wanted to solve that issue. And it was really fresh for us because we wanted to solve it for kind of finding a teammate at a hackathon. Who's the designer?
Right.
And so the technology we built was essentially a way to, in this room of people, see who matches some search query, like who's a designer or who is a developer with experience in Swift. And it would highlight those people based on the devices that they hold.
Right.
So that's what we built. We placed top 5, got 2 awards, Best of XR and Best of Data Visualization. But the awards were not really why we went. We went to learn and to
Right.
make new friends, and that's exactly what we did.
No, I thought you just carried yourself so well. I remember seeing you up there on the stage accepting awards, and I was just like, I know this guy. I mean, it was just so awesome. I mean, just the poise, and you almost kind of expected it of everybody that was there because everybody had felt like they had worked so hard to get there.
It was
You know,
all like really smart people.
just everybody had worked. They were all the top of where they had come from and had worked really hard to get there. But it was still awe-inspiring to see it happen in front of you.
Yeah.
You spoke a lot about one thing that I love that is at the core, I think, of what you do and you bring to your work, and I think is so fundamental about people who start businesses. And I know me, and I speaks to me a lot, but that's going after problems and tackling things at their core because it's a real pain point that's personal to you, that and that is something that you're actually trying to solve yourself. And that's something, once again, that you've done, that you had out of this moment of going there and needing to find teammates, and being like, wait a minute, this is a problem that I can't. And if more people took on that attitude like you took, of, hey, well, if there isn't something out there in the world that exists that can do this, well, doesn't mean I can't create it.
Yeah.
And it's exciting that if this is the future we're going to have over these next 10 years of people like you that have that mindset chasing, the future that way, it's going to be exciting times ahead, my friend. Like you said, your team, Visible, placed in the category, and I know you had mentioned that you potentially wanted to try and maybe push the code out so that next year's reality hack that we could use your software to actually help create teams, right?
Yeah, so when we did our testing, we tested it at most, I think, with 5 devices. So we, at this point, are not ready to do 400 people because that's what the amount of people was at the hackathon. But I think it's, at the opening ceremony of Reality Hack, what they told us was to show them the future of AR, and go with that mindset and with that like lens. I want to figure out, okay, next year is also the future, and so instead of thinking about 20 years down the road, is okay, what can we create right now that is still very innovative, but also so simple to understand that people just get it. And so, finding teammates at a hackathon is relevant, but when you're at like a recruiting event, you can also find employers that meet, your skills or whatever.
Right.
Or if you have someone who is like hearing impaired, they can see who speaks sign language. And so that's usually what I try to do with anything that I work on. I try to find something that's meaningful, that will actually have, actually will solve a problem, but it's also very personal, right? Because if it's not personal, you will never have the willpower alone is not enough, right? You need to have that empathy and that burning sensation to kind of want to work on it. And if you were you were, but if anyone that wasn't there at the hackathon, imagine 400 people all shouting over each other and you having to find a team with a deadline. That's not a good situation. And so if you can make that simpler, and if we, actually work with the team at MIT Reality Hack to make that a reality, bit of pun, we would be really open to doing that. It would be fun to do that.
That'd be exciting, man, to see. Is that I love to watch something that starts, like I said, as an idea, goes to the next level. Then a year later, everybody forgets about it, and then it's being employed, and used, deployed out in the real world, and helping people. So that's the power of technology. That's what I love about this field. So, like I said, is there any specific just memories? I mean, there were so many. But any specific memories from the hack before we move on that really, stood out? Any demos that you saw or work that was inspiring there? I know we saw the some crazy headsets and things. I mean, is there anything you want to just share about some of the interesting?
You probably won't like this answer, but my initial goal of going to Reality Hack was to network with as many people as possible, see all the devices. HoloLens 2 was there. The Vario, I think XR1 was there. Magic Leap was there. Everyone that matters in the space was there. And I didn't have time to see any of it. And I was sad because, I wanted to see all these devices, but, when you go to a hackathon, it's very intense. And so we were just like heads down for most of the time. And it was very exhausting too. But I'm sure there will be more opportunities to try out. After the event, I actually spoke to the folks from Magic Leap. We're still in contact. They're also Florida-based, and so being in contact with them is like a great thing. So yeah, I did meet amazing people. I did try some devices. But these things are so unpredictable. These events where you go for one thing and leave with something completely else. And in this case, it was better. I made new friends. And we worked on something very cool. Yeah,
and next time, like I told you, I think you're well qualified to potentially be an AR mentor.
If they want to,
and it's a little bit easier, I hear, on that side of the street.
It's nice and intense.
Relax and do a little bit more networking. So, let's move on. So how about coming out of that? It is like I said, is a really inspiring place. I know I'm still, like I said, on kind of cloud 9 from it, and don't plan on coming down anytime soon. But it really inspires you to make sure you're on top of all the work that you have when you come back home. And so, do you have any upcoming projects that are in the works that you're working on right now that you want to talk about or share, or anything that's in the AR space? Maybe.
Sure. So I'm not sure if it's a product. I mean, it kind of is. So one thing I noticed, and that's most business that I do, I always try to work on things that are emerging and are kind of like leading the space. And the issue that you run into is that there's not a lot of people that have skills to be employed in that space. So right now, there was this survey released by Hired.com that showed 1,400% interest from companies looking for AR and VR engineers, and that was over full stack developers, mobile developers, web developers, you name it. And so that demand is very huge right now. But there's not a lot of tools or educational material to be able to learn the skills that you need to be able to work on those things. And so what I've been working on actively is a YouTube channel. It's called Ryan Kopinsky. You can just search for it in YouTube. And there's two things that I try to do there. One is I try to at least help people get started. So I have a series called AR for Beginners, where I explain the technology, how it works. I try to explain it at a very fundamental level so it doesn't confuse people that are new to it. And just do things that are so simple. So you can actually build an AR game using just an iPhone and zero code. And so one of the videos I do, it explains to you how to do that. And the other component is a little bit more advanced. So for people that have like their appetite whet and they're excited about AR and really want to dive in, then I help them build AR apps for Apple's platforms. So using RealityKit, ARKit, and whatever other devices Apple may soon release. And so that's really like the most involved project that I have right now. I have some other ideas, but they're so, it's such an infancy that it doesn't really make sense mentioning that. But yeah, it's, if someone wants to work on very big problems that are very exciting and will definitely play a big role in the future, AR and VR are the space to be in.
That's awesome. Now we'll have to do a whole nother show on the affinity you have for Apple and all things
Apple fanboy here.
Don't blame you there for sure. But I'm a big Apple buff myself. It's just, like I said, I'm excited for their first AR product that's in the shadows, and I'm sure you'll be invited in behind the black curtain to,
I don't know about that.
to go work on when they're ready for you. But you please let us know. Come back on the podcast after you.
Sure.
After you.
I'll be the first one to pre-order one of them.
After you get that new headset. So, as a lot of my, I feel like, great heroes, I'm sure all the books you send me all the time, to tell you a lot is that so much about being successful, especially in business, is about understanding, the pace of change of technology and understanding, or trying to at least when things are going to happen. And so one thing that's really surprised me about the virtual reality space, since especially me and you, I feel like have really tackled both is almost like a yin and yang approach for the last 8-9 years we've been at this. And so is that you go back and talk to 8-year ago version of us, and we wouldn't really believe that it was this far ahead this fast, that you could walk in there in Best Buy and pick up a $400 headset that was completely mobile and do wireless VR and shoot that signal over to your TV, and somebody could watch it in near, 2 millisecond latency, type of stuff. It's really exciting to see the progress of all of these technologies and how fast they've moved so quickly. So I guess with what I've been surprised at is in the VR space, I haven't been able to kind of keep my finger on the pulse. I don't know if it's been quite that. I feel like we're just ramping up on the AR side. And AR has so much to do with hardware, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that, but and what it's going to take to really kind of move the needle over the coming years, and why people have gotten so excited about some of the early hardware. But it's really because the fundamental challenges that we're facing on the AR side of things, and some of the just literally hardware limitations that we're facing. But so I would say, what surprises you most about the pace of change that we're seeing in our space, and more importantly your space? And then are there any areas that in particular that you're excited to keep your eye on for, that you're surprised that are moving a lot faster than you thought, they're adopting it a lot faster, or ones that need it and could use a lot more of it?
Sure. So that's a complex question. There are both things that I think, went faster than I thought, but also when I went slower. So on the hardware side, I did think it was going to be faster than we are right now. And so as you see devices, if you've ever tried like HoloLens, or if you've ever tried any of the headsets, they're very heavy. Battery life is okay, and they're not as immersive as you would want them to be, because it's very complex to build something very immersive and very wide field of view,
right?
And then have it be affordable and light and all that stuff. And so I think, hardware-wise, like you mentioned, we are still struggling significantly on the AR side. I think the VR, I think VR has hit a stride where they made it work with the Quest, where it's like you cannot buy a Quest right now; it's all sold out.
Right.
And so that, I think VR is about 3 years ahead of AR when it comes to hardware. Some interesting development that we've seen is mobile AR, where you have just a phone and you view a digital world through a window,
right,
with cameras on the back. And surprisingly was that Apple and Google released these SDKs. ARKit is from Apple and ARCore is from Google, that are extremely powerful, that even a beginner coder can create a sophisticated AR experience. And I did not expect that because I expected them to wait for the hardware to be ready.
Right.
But it was brilliant what they did, because by releasing it for mobile phones as an intermediary step,
Mm-hmm.
you get content and you get experiences on these new app stores. And once you have the proper hardware for them, it's just plug and play, knowing Apple. It'll just convert instantly and it'll be seamless.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the software side, I think we're very advanced. Now, I'm going to go a little bit geeky into this. The way you usually map your environment is by a time of flight 3D depth sensor. So you want to sense depth, not just an image.
Okay.
And so that happens either with infrared, where you blast infrared in the environment and it comes back and you see where the depth is, or laser. And I always thought that to do proper AR on a phone, you would need some sensor that does that. But Apple and Google don't really have those sensors on the devices. They use computer vision and AI to essentially sense depth.
Mm.
And so I didn't know or think it was going to be this sophisticated, this early on.
Right.
And so, at some point you have to ask the question, do you really need sophisticated hardware if the software itself is so powerful? And computer vision, I mean, they're killing it with that. And so it's like a yes and no question. I do think that in some respects we are ahead of where I anticipated we would be with the software, but I think we're lagging behind with the hardware. And that's also why Apple hasn't released hardware yet, because Apple doesn't really release things that are, subpar. But I do think that in the next 2-3 years, we'll see at least one thing coming from Apple that is in the MR, VR space, and then glasses soon after. The IP, at least, their IP filings. If you look online and you look for all the IP protection stuff that they file,
Right.
all their patents and stuff, they are very much actively working on it, but I think we're still a few years out.
Right. Well, you bring up a great point. If you were satisfied with where we were at, then we wouldn't have
Yeah,
people.
we don't have to do anything.
Right. We'd be complacent. So, I'm glad that you're passionate about this field. And like I said, I think there's so many applications in healthcare, and automotive and training and education. It's like we were, alluding to earlier. If a kid can sit there and look down at a plain old textbook, but then the headset that he got from Apple, yesterday, that everybody has because it'll be the hit thing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And he can look down at that book and the QR code brings to life the elephant or the whale, and then he can interact and learn about it and explore it and get excited about education. I just think we need to meet kids halfway. If Fortnite is their evening dinner, like education, if that's what they're doing when they go home from school, is be consumed by a really addicting, well thought out, highly, trained game to get kids excited about this thing. I mean, hours of research have been put in to make that game highly addicting. That the same level of approach has to be brought on our end to make education exciting and worthwhile. And I think both the VR side and the AR side has those components for both the education, the healthcare, the automotive space, and so many others, of giving kids a taste, robotics, giving kids a taste. We share that story. I know we probably can't talk about that of some of the prior work that you've done, but you did an amazing internship at a really amazing, place that I'm sure, 4-letter acronym type of place that a lot of people don't get to work at. And one of the pieces broke that you had told me about in the past.
Thousands of dollars.
Thousands of dollars.
I lost.
So if a child can potentially do that level of training in AR and just look down and place pieces around them and try out a new component and see how these pieces are going to work or fit, even if it's just training their mind to get excited about that level of one day I'll get to work in a factory and do it, I think it's all the better. So like I said, really excited that you're in this space and you bring your passion to it. And then more importantly, like I said, the education approach, that you understand that what you're doing with your channel, that this has to be communicated in a way that is very approachable. And I think, people are going to catch on really quickly, and we'll be posting, the channel in the notes. Please, subscribe, but it's well underrated now, and will be, mark my words. I really been a fan of picking talent on YouTube that blows up before it blows up.
It's always fun to see.
That's my thing, and so I mark my words now. I'm telling you, I'm subscribed, and it's not changing where I'm at, where I was in line. But you'll have, I think, millions down the road when people start to see the use cases of these technologies, and then they're looking for someone to explains it in a way that's accessible and exciting for people. And I think we were a testament to somebody. We were at the Reality Hack event, and someone who was a neuroscientist or somewhere from London, out of London or somewhere, even though his channel barely has, it doesn't have a lot of subscribers right now, which will change, but they came up to him and had seen his video and were praising him about, how accessible his video and how well done it was in the topic and how few there were.
Well, there were none. So I started because there was no content on it.
Right. So, when you're trying to get into ARKit, on iOS, especially development right now, you're kind of that king.
Well, so
on
ARKit,
YouTube.
So the way Apple works is ARKit is like their really low level AR toolkit, and then you have Reality Kit, which is really simple to learn compared to ARKit. Compared to ARKit.
Gotcha.
So Reality Kit, if you YouTube search Reality Kit, you'll probably see one of my videos there. But speaking about education, there's one thing that I wanted to mention. So I am really fascinated with the way the brain and the mind work. And I don't know if it happened to you at any point in time, but usually if you forget something, right, when you go back to a specific place, you all of a sudden remember it. And so what has been shown by neuroscientists is that we remember things spatially. So that's why people go back to their kitchen, to figure out where the keys are, because that's where they were last. And so AR and VR potentially, offer a huge incentive for education, because we remember things spatially. The way the brain works is really spatially. And so if you can then train people with those things in mind, the engagement can go up so much more than a really boring textbook in black and white.
Right.
So I think AR and VR have a huge potential in education.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I'm so exciting, and we're just on, like I said, the beginning of starting to be able to prove that to everybody that the retention rates do rise. We'll lead out with one last question here. If you could choose, one area in the enterprise sector, and then one area maybe in the, like you said, the education space. Actually, it's a three-part question. Sorry, three-parter. So we have what area in the enterprise, what area in the education space, and then what can we do as maybe a public or a community to help the classroom adoption for the technology.
Okay, so the first part of the question was, what is a very good use case for enterprise level business, right? And there's really a lot of use cases, but when you're in business, there's really two things that really come to mind for me: data visualization, and really relating data the way it should be. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you own a manufacturing plant, right, there's likely you already have an IoT play, right, Internet of Things play, and I'm sure that you're also looking for AI. But what tends to happen is data is usually spatial, right? If you have a manufacturing plant, the data for that specific boiler is not just on a 2D display, right? And yes, you can have a floor plan, but when you can start to essentially overlay data in your plant, for example, for someone who is in charge of maintenance, where they can just look at that area where the boiler is, and they can see, oh, this was, diagnosed 2 weeks ago, and it needs this part. And so when you can start to kind of visualize data and kind of insights spatially, I think, the enterprise / manufacturing, industry space, that's the low-hanging fruit. It really is. And it's going to be $1 billion industry, if not $1 trillion. If we're thinking about education, that's a little bit, that's a bit broader. The use cases are still being defined there.
Is it a platform that we need? Do we need to create a thingiverse of AR for education? Do we need, you see what I mean, some type of thing that helps pull the resources to make it easier and more accessible and more friendly. Maybe kids can create their own education AR
Sure.
components using AR Kit.
Yeah, so there's education and then there's the schooling system. So I don't think the schooling system will be that quick to adopt AR because AR is so fast moving. And so I think they're in the mass majority, right? We're kind of like a late adopter. But what we've seen is that content creators, kids, teenagers, people on TikTok, like all those apps, they're very much into AR because they've been creating Instagram filters, they've been creating TikTok filters, and so they have an appetite for it and they know how to use it. Pokemon Go is also a testament that people are ready for mass AR. And so when you think of education, I think, like you mentioned, there needs to be a very easy platform, kind of like YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be YouTube because YouTube, they're already so focused on video, but a platform where people can share their AR experiences in such a frictionless way that anyone can access it from any device, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't exist right now. So there's two problems right now, major problems in the AR space. One, publishing and distribution, right? If I publish an AR app for iPhone, Android can't get it. HoloLens can't get it, Magic Leap can't get it. And so there's no ubiquity, universal platform. That will change. And two, content. So in my business, whenever I use content for my videos, people don't know it, but I spend thousands of dollars on third-party content to license it, like thousands. And I really appreciate the artists making that content, and I'm happy to pay for it. But that's a problem that most other people don't have that budget, and so content availability, is a very big problem too. And so I think when you have a platform that allows people to, frictionlessly build experiences that teach people things and then share it, I want to say that the VR world is again ahead. Tilt Brush. When Tilt Brush was released by Google, I don't think they imagined what people would use it for to the extent that people use it.
Mm-hmm.
People make full game worlds and they teach people things and they evoke emotion with a simple tool that Google just brushes, whatever. And so we don't have that simplicity and accessibility that Tilt Brush offers many people who have VR platforms.
Right.
I think that's the issue in education.
Yeah, it's a little bit that chicken before the egg problem where if the hardware is not perfect, nobody wants to leap and use it. And if the software isn't there, then nobody wants to do the hardware. So, like you said, it's either going to take that player like an Apple that comes in and says, hey, here's the de facto, right, AR headset that we all know and love, and it becomes that hit overnight. And then they develop something like an app store, right, that starts the education movement, or it's somebody like me and you who create this thing we're talking about and creates a novel way, I think, to take advantage of the platforms, or maybe even bridge more of the platforms together. I would love to see one, for example, that doesn't leave the Android side out, that for the first time someone agnostically creates a system that would work maybe with Google, with AR Kit and with AR Core. I mean, and they could you could go to the shared library of experiences at least and have some parity, instead of, always having this, what I mean? The platform wars is how it always gets going.
But there's a reason why it's so segmented right now. When you have AR Kit, right? You're able to use AR Kit.
Mm-hmm.
But the way it maps the environment is somewhat different than AR Core, which is by Google.
Yeah.
And so for them to actually talk, you need to know how they work internally.
Oh, and I don't even necessarily mean as a place to talk. I just mean a shared community portal where you can click and say, hey, here's the ones for AR Kit, but then there's a section for the AR Core
That will happen soon.
people,
That will happen soon.
and just a place where there's a library of stuff that's out there that people can access if you're trying to kind of get in this, no matter what kind of device you're coming from.
Yeah.
As long as there's content, would be exciting. Well, Ryan, honestly, this has been amazing, man. I really appreciate you coming by. I like I said, for wanting to start this podcast for so long, and I feel like me and you have been buddies for a while, and one of those few buddies I've had that have had that kindred spirit and love for technology and an ever-going passion for the world and the spaces that we're in. Mine has been, really consumed by VR, especially lately, and some 3D printing. But watching you, dive into this huge AR space, which has just got so many applications, and then seeing your love from the robotic side of things, and then, like I said, how you've just gotten all the way to MIT, winning awards. It's been pretty fun to watch you, and I just can't wait to see where you go. I'd love to just give you an opportunity to, once again, please tell us about your what you're doing on your channel, and how you just were honestly getting started. Talk a little bit about that, and anything else you want to share on your way out here.
Sure. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, we've known each other for, I think, 8 years now. And there isn't a different person in Tallahassee where I would say, I can literally have a good conversation about the things that I care about, and it's always been with you. So I appreciate you inviting me. So if you're interested in AR and you want to learn, I have a YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Ryan Kopinsky, or you can just go to ryankopinsky.com. It'll redirect you. Yesterday, I got my 400 subscriber, which was a good milestone.
Very nice.
On the way to 1,000.
Congrats.
That's the next milestone. And so it's very exciting. It's growing, but like you mentioned, enjoying the baby steps, enjoying every part of the journey, and really trying to help the space. So my goal is to educate people, make them excited about AR, and give them the tools that they need to build amazing experiences. I think you do the same thing for VR, so it's always good to talk to you. So thank you for having me.
Well, mark my words, fellas. You're watching the next, like I said, Marquez, the next Linus, the next, one of these people. You're just watching them, because if you really go back, and I'm telling you, I'll leave on this. If you really go back and you look at some of those guys, they started, 10 years ago. They progressed a lot, and this guy, I've been watching him for so long, and he's so methodical, and takes such a approach the same way, I'm sure getting a PhD took. But you really bring the heat right out of the gate. And so I think it speaks, if you go back, and if you guys go and check out his channel, just go back to the beginning and take a look at it. Just from the beginning, I mean, he's starting out at such a higher level than I think a lot of people. That's just a testament to his hard work that he's put in. So yeah, go check out that channel, and thanks so much for coming on, Ryan, man. This was amazing, and can't wait to do it again.
I appreciate you having me.